I'm Edith, 24F, and I've been dating Andy, 27M, for about 3 years now. We met during my sophomore year of college at a mutual friend's Halloween party. I remember it clearly because I was dressed as Wonder Woman, and Andy came as Clark Kent. He kept making jokes about how I was the real superhero of the night. We hit it off immediately, talking for hours about our shared love of 90s cartoons and our dreams for the future. At the time, I was studying accounting and working part-time at the campus bookstore. Andy was in his final year of business administration and a job as a bartender at a popular local pub. He always had the best stories about the characters he'd meet at the bar, and I loved listening to him talk about his plans to own his own business someday. Our relationship moved pretty quickly. Within 6 months, we were practically living together in my tiny off-campus apartment. Andy would stay over most nights, and we fell into a comfortable routine. I'd wake up early for classes, and he'd make me breakfast before heading to his afternoon lectures or evening shifts at the bar. Things were great for the first year or so. We went on fun dates, hung out with friends, and talked about our future together. Andy graduated a year before me and landed an entry-level job at a local marketing firm. I was so proud of him and thought this was the start of our bright future together. We celebrated by taking a weekend trip to the beach, where we talked about eventually getting married and starting a family. I graduated the following year and got a job as a junior accountant at a small firm. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was stable, and I was excited to start building my career. Andy and I decided to move in together officially, renting a small 2-bedroom apartment closer to the city center. We spent weekends hunting for second-hand furniture and arguing good-naturedly about color schemes. It felt like we were really building a life together. About a year and a half into our relationship, Andy lost his job. He came home one day, looking shell-shocked, and told me there had been layoffs due to budget cuts. I remember hugging him tightly and assuring him that we'd figure it out together. Andy was optimistic, saying he had good references and experience now, so he was sure he'd find something new quickly. I supported him emotionally and financially for a few months, covering our dates and helping with his portion of rent when he fell short. I didn't mind at first because I loved him and wanted to help. Plus, I remembered how supportive he'd been when I was stressing over final exams or job interviews. It felt good to be able to return the favor. Weeks turned into months, and Andy still hadn't found a new job. He said he was applying, but I never saw him actually sitting down to fill out applications or prepare for interviews. Instead, he spent most of his time playing video games or hanging out with his friends. I started to feel frustrated but didn't want to nag him. I'd come home from work exhausted, only to find Andy on the couch, exactly where I'd left him in the morning. I tried to encourage him gently, sending him job listings I thought he'd be interested in or offering to review his resume. But Andy always had an excuse: the jobs weren't right for him, or he was waiting to hear back about a different application. I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells, not wanting to upset him but also increasingly worried about our financial situation. 6 months after losing his job, Andy came to me with an idea. He wanted to start his own business, a food truck selling gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches. He was so excited about it, his eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. Andy said it was his dream, combining his love of cooking — he'd always been the chef in our relationship — with the business skills he'd learned in college. Andy asked me to co-sign a loan for $30,000 to buy and outfit the truck. I was hesitant, given his recent employment history, but he promised he had a solid business plan. He showed me a spreadsheet of projected costs and earnings, and talked about how food trucks were becoming increasingly popular in our city. Andy said he'd researched the permits needed and had even talked to some other food truck owners for advice. I remember lying awake that night, torn between wanting to support Andy's dream and feeling anxious about taking on such a large financial responsibility. In the end, my love for Andy and my desire to see him happy and successful won out. I agreed to co-sign the loan, with the understanding that Andy would be responsible for the payments. Andy seemed motivated for the first few weeks. He researched health codes, developed a menu, and even made some practice sandwiches that were delicious. I'd come home from work to find our kitchen transformed into a test lab, with different types of cheese and bread scattered everywhere. It was messy, but I was just happy to see Andy excited about something again. But then things started to go downhill. Andy kept pushing back the launch date of the food truck. First, he said he needed more time to perfect the recipes. Then he said he was waiting for better weather. Months went by, and the food truck sat unused in our apartment complex's parking lot. I'd look at it every day as I left for work, a constant reminder of our mounting debt. I tried talking to Andy about it, but he always had excuses. He said he was still working on permits, or waiting for the right event to debut at. Meanwhile, the loan payments were coming due, and Andy had no income to pay them. I ended up covering the payments to protect my own credit score, which put a major strain on my finances. I had to dip into my savings, the money I'd been putting aside for eventually going back to school for my master's degree. Now, it's been almost a year since we got the loan, and the food truck has never made a single sale. Andy spends most of his time playing video games or going out with friends, while I work overtime to cover our bills and the loan payments. When I try to discuss the situation with him, he gets defensive and accuses me of not supporting his dreams. Last week, things came to a head when I came home to find Andy and his friends using the food truck as a giant game console, projecting their video game onto the side of it. They were drinking beers and laughing, completely oblivious to my shock and disappointment. When I tried to talk to Andy about it later, he accused me of embarrassing him in front of his friends and said I was being unsupportive. I love Andy, but I'm starting to feel like I'm being taken advantage of. I'm stressed all the time about money, and I'm starting to resent him for putting us in this situation. I've had to cancel plans with my own friends because I can't afford to go out. I'm wearing clothes with holes in them because I can't justify buying new ones when we're struggling to make rent. I don't know what to do. Should I give him more time to get the business off the ground? Should I insist he get a regular job? Or is it time to consider ending the relationship? I keep thinking about the Andy I fell in love with, the ambitious, hard-working guy who made me laugh and supported my dreams. I don't know if that Andy still exists, or if he's been replaced by this person I barely recognize. I feel lost and could really use some advice. Has anyone been in a similar situation? How did you handle it? I'm scared of making the wrong decision and ruining both our lives. Update 1. Thank you all for your comments and advice on my original post. Your words really gave me the courage to face this situation head-on. I took some time to think about everything and decided to have a serious talk with Andy about our situation. Here's what happened. I chose a Saturday morning when we were both home and Andy was usually in a good mood. I made his favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes, hoping it would help soften the blow of the conversation we needed to have. As we sat down to eat, I took a deep breath and started to explain how stressed I've been feeling about our financial situation. I told Andy that while I supported his dreams, I couldn't continue covering all our expenses and the loan payments for the unused food truck. I showed him our bank statements and the Excel sheet where I'd been tracking our expenses. The numbers didn't lie, we were drowning in debt, and I was the only one treading water. I asked Andy to either start the business properly or get a job to contribute to our finances. I even suggested he could do both, work part-time while getting the food truck business off the ground. I thought I was being reasonable, offering a compromise. Andy's reaction wasn't what I hoped for. He barely touched his pancakes, which was the first red flag. Andy never skips breakfast. As I talked, I could see his face getting redder and his jaw clenching. When I finished, he exploded. He accused me of not believing in him, saying that starting a business takes time and that I was being unsupportive by pressuring him. He brought up how he had supported me through college, conveniently forgetting that he was in college too at the time and that I had worked part-time throughout my studies. When I pointed out that he hadn't made any progress with a food truck in months, he stood up so suddenly he knocked over his chair. He stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. I was left sitting at the table, staring at the uneaten pancakes and fighting back tears. This wasn't how I had imagined the conversation going at all. I spent the rest of the day cleaning the apartment, trying to keep my hands and mind busy. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a message from Andy, but there was nothing. Andy didn't come home that night. I was worried sick, calling and texting him with no response. I even called a few of his friends, but they either didn't know where he was or were covering for him. I barely slept, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. He finally showed up the next evening, reeking of alcohol. He mumbled an apology and passed out on the couch. I was relieved he was home safe but also angry and hurt that he had disappeared for over 24 hours without a word. The next morning, I tried to talk to him again when he was sober. I made coffee and sat down next to him on the couch, determined to have a calm, adult conversation. This time, Andy's reaction surprised me again, but in a different way. He broke down crying. It was shocking to see. In 3 years, I had never seen Andy cry before. Between sobs, he confessed that he had been struggling with depression since losing his job and felt like a failure. He said he was too ashamed to tell me and had been using the food truck idea as a way to avoid facing reality. Andy admitted that he hadn't really been applying for jobs because he was terrified of being rejected again. He said he felt worthless and didn't want to disappoint me, so he kept pretending everything was fine. The food truck had become both his dream and his hiding place. I was stunned by this revelation. I had no idea Andy was dealing with these feelings. In hindsight, there were probably signs I had missed or misinterpreted. I felt guilty for not realizing how much he was struggling, but also frustrated that he hadn't been honest with me. I suggested he consider talking to a counselor or therapist, but he was resistant to the idea. He said he couldn't afford it, which was true, given our financial situation, and that he didn't want to be seen as crazy. Instead, he promised he would start looking for a job and ask for one more chance. Against my better judgment, again, I agreed to give him some more time. Andy seemed genuinely remorseful and motivated to make changes. He spent the next few days updating his resume and applying for jobs online. I even helped him prepare for a phone interview with a local company. For a week, things seemed to be looking up. Andy was more active, helping around the house and actually working on job applications. We even had a nice date night at home, cooking dinner together and watching our favorite movie. It felt like maybe we were turning a corner. However, about a week later, I came home from work to find Andy excitedly pacing the living room. Before I could even take off my coat, he launched into an enthusiastic speech about a new business idea. He wanted to pivot from the food truck to starting a subscription box service for artisanal cheeses. He had spent the day researching cheese producers and subscription box services, and was convinced this was the next big thing. Andy asked if we could use the remaining money from the loan to buy inventory for the first round of subscription boxes. He had already designed a logo and started building a website. His enthusiasm was reminiscent of when he first talked about the food truck, and for a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. But then reality set in. We were right back where we started, with Andy chasing a new dream and asking me to fund it. When I reminded Andy about his promise to look for a job, he said this new idea was even better and would make us rich. He talked about how we could quit our jobs, or in his case, not have to get one, and run this business together. We got into a huge argument. Andy accused me of crushing his entrepreneurial spirit and not believing in him. I accused him of being financially irresponsible and not caring about the stress he was putting me under. We both said things we didn't mean, dredging up old issues and hurts. The argument ended with Andy grabbing his jacket and leaving the apartment. I heard his car start up and drive away. I was left standing in our living room, surrounded by cheese catalogs and subscription box samples, feeling completely lost. Now I'm at a crossroads. Part of me wants to believe in Andy and support him, especially knowing he's been struggling with his mental health. I remember the guy I fell in love with, his passion and drive, and I want to believe that person is still in there somewhere. But another part of me feels like I'm being manipulated and taken advantage of. I'm exhausted from carrying the financial burden for both of us, and I'm starting to lose myself in the process. I've been putting my own dreams on hold, and I'm not sure how much longer I can do it. I'm considering moving out for a while to get some space and perspective. But I'm worried about what will happen to Andy, and the loan payments, if I'm not there. Despite everything, I still care about him and don't want to see him hit rock bottom. I feel torn between my love for him and my need for financial stability and peace of mind. I'm also scared of being alone. Andy and I have been together for so long, I'm not sure who I am without him. What do you think I should do? Am I being too harsh or not harsh enough? How can I support Andy's mental health without enabling his financial irresponsibility? I feel like I'm drowning and I don't know how to save both of us. Update 2. I want to thank everyone again for their advice and support. Your comments really helped me gain perspective on my situation with Andy. Here's what's happened since my last update. After our argument about the cheese subscription box idea, I decided I needed some space to think. I told Andy I was going to stay with my sister for a week. He didn't take it well, accusing me of abandoning him when he needed me most. It was hard, but I stood my ground and left anyway. My sister, Victoria, lives about an hour away. She's 2 years older than me and has always been my rock. When I arrived at her place, luggage in hand and fighting back tears, she didn't ask any questions. She just hugged me and said, "Wine or ice cream?" We ended up having both. During that week, I did a lot of thinking and talking with Victoria and my friends. They helped me see how much Andy's behavior was affecting my own mental health and financial stability. Victoria pointed out that I'd stopped talking about my own goals and dreams. All our conversations lately had been about Andy and his problems. My best friend from college, Agnes, came to visit one day. She reminded me of how ambitious I used to be, always talking about getting my CPA and maybe even starting my own accounting firm one day. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd even thought about those dreams. I also took the time to really look at our finances. I created a spreadsheet of all our debts, income, and expenses. The numbers were even worse than I'd thought. I realized that even if I continued working overtime, we'd never get ahead if Andy didn't start contributing. By the end of the week, I felt clearer about what I needed to do. I wasn't ready to end the relationship entirely, but I knew something had to change. I decided to go back home and have an honest conversation with Andy about our future. When I returned home, I had every intention of having a calm, rational discussion with Andy about our future. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say, focusing on I statements like my sister had suggested. However, what I found when I opened our apartment door left me speechless. Andy had transformed our small apartment into what he called a cheese aging cave. The living room furniture had been pushed to the walls, and in the center were several large, humidity-controlled containers. Each one contained what looked like wheels of cheese in various stages of aging. The smell hit me like a wall. It was a pungent mix of different cheeses, overwhelming in the small space. I saw Andy emerge from the kitchen, wearing a white coat like he was some kind of cheese scientist. When I asked Andy what was going on, he excitedly explained that he had a new plan. Instead of a subscription box, he was going to age and sell artisanal cheeses to high-end restaurants. He had already reached out to some local chefs on social media and said he had gotten positive responses. Andy went on to explain how he had used the remaining money from the loan to buy several wheels of expensive cheese and set up these humidity-controlled containers. He talked about the different types of cheese he was aging, a French Comté, an Italian Pecorino, and something called Stinking Bishop from England. I was floored. Not only had Andy spent the last of our loan money without consulting me, but he had also made our apartment unlivable in the process. The living room, where we used to cuddle and watch movies, was now a makeshift cheese cellar. Our bedroom was stacked with boxes of cheese-making equipment and books. When I expressed my frustration, Andy accused me of always trying to hold him back. He said I should be grateful he was working so hard to secure our future. He talked about how artisanal cheese was a booming market and how we could make thousands of dollars selling to fancy restaurants. That was the last straw for me. I realized that no matter how much I loved Andy, I couldn't continue to sacrifice my own well-being for his unrealistic schemes. I told him I was moving out permanently and that we needed to figure out how to handle the remaining loan payments. Andy's reaction was a mix of anger and panic. He begged me to stay, promising he would get a real job this time. He said he'd sell the cheese equipment and we could go back to how things were. But I had heard those promises before, and I couldn't believe them anymore. I spent that night at a hotel, unable to sleep in the cheese cave our apartment had become. The next day, I went back with Victoria to pack up my things. Andy alternated between pleading with me to stay and angrily accusing me of giving up on him. It was heartbreaking, but I knew I was making the right decision for myself. I'm now staying with my sister while I look for a new apartment. Andy is still in our old place with his cheese cave. I'm working on separating our finances and figuring out how to handle the loan situation. It's complicated because both our names are on the loan, but I'm determined to find a solution. It's been incredibly difficult emotionally. Despite everything, I still care about Andy and worry about how he'll cope. But I also feel a sense of relief. For the first time in months, I'm not constantly stressed about money or walking on eggshells at home. I know I have a long road ahead in terms of rebuilding my finances and healing from this relationship, but I'm hopeful for the future. I've started looking into classes to prepare for the CPA exam, something I'd put on the back burner while dealing with Andy's issues. Has anyone gone through a similar financial breakup? Any advice on how to protect myself legally and financially as I move forward? And how do you deal with the guilt of leaving someone you care about, even when you know it's the right thing to do? Update 3. It's been a few months since my last update, and I wanted to share what's happened since then. A lot has changed, and while things aren't perfect, I feel like I'm finally moving in the right direction. After moving out, I consulted with a lawyer about the loan situation. They advised me to try to work out an agreement with Andy before considering legal action. I was nervous about reaching out to Andy, but to my surprise, he agreed to meet and discuss things civilly. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our new places. Walking in, I hardly recognized Andy. He had lost weight and looked tired, but there was something different in his eyes. A clarity that I hadn't seen in a long time. During our meeting, Andy seemed like a different person. He was apologetic and admitted that his behavior had been irresponsible. He told me he had finally sought help for his depression and was seeing a therapist regularly. The cheese cave disaster had been a wake-up call for him. Andy also shared that he had gotten a part-time job at a local cheese shop, ironically. He said working there had opened his eyes to how much he didn't know about the cheese business, and he was learning about the industry properly. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was a steady paycheck and he was enjoying it. We came to an agreement about the loan. Andy took full responsibility for the remaining balance and set up a payment plan with the bank. He also agreed to sell the food truck and put that money towards the loan. I was relieved to have this financial burden lifted, even though I know it will take years for Andy to pay it off completely. As for me, I've moved into a small studio apartment. It's tiny, but it's mine, and I don't have to share it with aging wheels of cheese. I'm focusing on rebuilding my savings and my life. My work has been understanding about everything I've been through, and I've picked up some extra shifts to help make ends meet. It's been challenging, but I already feel more in control of my life and finances. I've also started seeing a therapist to work through some of the emotional fallout from my relationship with Andy. It's helping me understand why I stayed in that situation for so long and how to set better boundaries in the future. I'm learning that it's okay to prioritize my own needs and dreams. Andy and I have limited contact now, mainly just updates about the loan payments. It's bittersweet. Part of me misses the good times we had, but I know this separation was necessary for both of us to grow and heal. Last week, I passed the first part of my CPA exam. It was hard studying while working extra hours, but it felt amazing to achieve something I'd been dreaming about for so long. For the first time in years, I'm excited about my future and what I might achieve. Looking back, I can see how much I've learned from this experience. While it was painful, it taught me valuable lessons about financial responsibility, the importance of open communication in relationships, and standing up for myself. I've grown stronger and more independent, and I'm proud of the person I'm becoming. To anyone who might be in a similar situation, don't be afraid to prioritize your own well-being. It's not selfish to protect yourself financially and emotionally. And remember, you're stronger than you think. Thank you all again for your support throughout this journey. Your advice and kind words have meant more than you know. Here's to new beginnings and lessons learned.